So I'm going to go back to my editor and we're going to be implementing this very small middleware that's going to prevent us from um, displaying the login form if we're already logged in, right? And that's also going to be pretty simple because we're only going to be implementing the particular code that we need per class to do just that one particular job. So I'm going to go back to the editor and we're going to be creating new directory for our middleware, right? So I'm going to, let's close off some of these files for now because we're not using those. Let's close this. And within our app directory, I'm going to create a new directory called middleware. Within this middleware directory, I'm also going to be creating a before directory as well. So I'm going to say new directory before, right? So we got before and after directory, and what that does, all right, it's more like an organizing of our middleware files. So right, so we can execute event or execute middleware before an action, and we can execute middleware after an action. So all the before middleware, we're going to be putting those within the before directory, and all the after middleware we're going to be putting in the after directory. But for the time being, we're going to be creating this one directory for now, and we're going to be creating the class that we're going to be using to redirect users away from the login page if they're already logged in. So, and I'm going to name this class is already logged in, right? So is already logged in. And I'm using camel case notation to name my classes, and that's going to be important because whatever your class is named, whatever your file is named, your class should be named. And also when we come to register or middleware, we must also use that name to register the middleware, or else it won't work, right? So I'm going to say okay, and I've just created this class that says is already logged in, right? That's the name of the middleware class that we're going to be implementing. So again, like usual, we're going to be doing all our declaration namespace within the app directory. We're now within our middleware directory, right? I can spell, and then we're in our before directory, just like so. So I'm going to say class is already logged in, and we go into open and close parentheses, or open and close bracket, I should say. So there's a couple of stuff that we also must also extend into, and that's going to be the before middleware class. So we have to implement that. So I'm going to say extends before middleware, and you can see it automatically imported that for us, and that is a class located within the MagmaCore directory middleware component, and a class called before middleware, right? And that execute any middleware before the request, right? And the after middleware class execute a middleware after the request, right? So by doing that, we also must implement the single method that we use to handle our middleware, and that's going to be a public function. See if this is going to autocomplete for us. Public function middleware, just like that. We're going to get rid of that because we don't need that. That's an auto-generated stuff from PHP Storm, right? So it goes like this. We got two arguments in all of our middleware. The first is an object, and what this object is simply a copy of our security object. But at this point, it doesn't know that, right? So when we register this particular class, are based on where we register this class in, then it will get that object, right? So on the next message, the next argument is a closure, which is next. And in each of our middleware, we must return the next middleware with the object as the argument, or the middleware object as the argument. So I'm going to say return next, just like so, and we're going to pass it the middleware object. Just like, we have to do this, all right? If we don't do this, then our middleware, the next one, won't get executed. So every middleware must return the next middleware with the current object as the argument, just like what we've done right here. So we're returning the next as a closure, right? And we're passing it the middleware argument. So the next middleware can have access to that middleware object. So let's have a little think about what is it we want to implement. We want to implement or prevent the user from accessing the login page if they're already logged in. So if they're sort of like logged in and trying to get back onto that login page, we want to just redirect them away from that page. We can redirect them, just redirect them, or we can also redirect them back from where they're coming from with a message, so they know, or they're getting some kind of feedback onto what just happened. Because if I'm going onto a page and I'm being redirected back, I'm like, what's going on here? I don't know why I'm being. So we're going to be putting a message as well, so they know the reason why they're being redirected back to where they're coming from. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to do a if statement. I'm going to check the current controller is on the actual login route, and if we're on that route, then and we're already logged in, then just redirect back. So I'm going to say if middleware, to say this route controller is equal to security, right? So what this is saying is, remember, the middleware is the actual controller object we're going to be passing to the middleware, or I should say it's already been passed. As a matter of fact, I think I best show this to you so you've got a little bit more understanding rather than listening to what I'm saying. So I'm going to actually put some, or shed some light on this particular method, and you can see what it's actually doing. So if I bring you to my vendor directory, MagmaCore source base controller, and I bring it to my actual base controller, I'm going to go down to this before method, right? This is within the base controller, and this is where I am registering or newing up my middleware object. So you can see the first thing that I'm doing is I'm storing this current object with the current route parameters within this object variable. I'm newing up my middleware object, and I'm calling the middlewares, and I am passing a method that is called that is called call before middlewares, and that's a method that we're going to be implementing next within our controller, because this is where we register all the middleware for a particular controller, right? So once we pass an array of middleware, because this is what this method takes, it returns an array of middleware. We're passing that to our middleware object so we can execute them one after the other, right? So this is where the middleware argument is the object argument within that middleware method is coming from. It's this object that we're passing in right here, right? This is that middleware passing that object in, and the second argument, which is that callback, that's what we're doing. That's a closure that we're returning as the next variable. Hence why we have to return it next and pass the object back to it to execute the next middleware that we've got in that array. So that is a bit of context on where I am newing up my middleware object and how we're bringing it in to our application, and how we're registering our own middleware, which is what I'm going to be showing you once we create this actual middleware handler. Show you how I register it and how it works within the application. So that's the before and that's the after, which is pretty much the same, right? So we've got the same object access to either before or after middleware. So, and these actually, again, I should also point out again, these get execute before we call a method, and that's all to do with again this cool magic method, because that before is being executed before we call any of our method. It's like a filter, right? So we can execute some code before we call the actual method, right? And after we call that method, we can also execute some code. So this is how I'm implementing my middleware within this application. So back into the is already login middleware, we're going to finish implementing this. So we're saying middleware, and this route controller is a method which is a abstraction from that route params. Remember, in our route params, we've got access to the control, the action, token, and token and namespace, right? So I'm simply returning. Let me show you again actually before we go. Actually, it's in my abstract base controller class. So you see, I've got this route controller method is simply returning the controller from the route parameter, right? It's ensuring that it's set, and it's returning a lowercase version. Well, it's ensuring that the string that's being returned is going to be in lowercase. So let me close all this file again. So when I'm saying middleware, this route controller equal or triple equal security, what I'm saying is this method should be security, and I'm ensuring that it actually equals to this particular string, right? Because that is the class that we're checking that the method is being executed from. So we can be specific and actually also get the name of the method, but because it's not necessary for this particular class, because we're only executing that one method, right? So at this point, I also want to get the current session ID, right? So I'm going to say user ID equal middleware, and I want to get session, right? And the get session is a method also defined within the base controller, and what it does, it returns the session object, right? And on that session object, I can then call some of the methods I got within that session class, and the method I'm going to be calling is the get method, right? So get, and what I'm getting is the username, the user ID of that session. So if I bring you back to my browser, let me switch my screen again, bring it back to my browser. Let's go back to our home page because we should still be logged in, right? Let's go to view source, and you can see what I'm getting is this user ID, because that's the session. That's what the string, session string, is registered as user ID. So that's effectively what I am getting, what I'm trying to get within this get method from a session. I'm getting that user ID, which is going to return 1, because that's what the user ID in a session is, which is 1, right? At this point, I want to check if that user ID is set and it's not and it's not 0. And if it's not 0 and it's checked and it's there, then I'm going to actually redirect the user away if they try to access that login form again. So I'm to say if is set user ID and user ID isn't equal to 0, note the exclamation sign and the double equal. So we're saying if it's not equal to 0, then meaning that it's a valid user, then we're going to redirect away with a message. So I'm going to say middleware flash message, and I'm going to say middleware redirect. And where do we want to redirect to? Just like what we've done within our login action subscriber, we're going to be calling up on that authorize class again, and we're going to be using that method to redirect back where we're coming from. So it's going to be authorize and get return to page, just like so. And in our flash message, we're going to pass in a string that we want the user to, we're going to pass in a string that the user is going to see. So we can say something like, you are already logged in, right? Just like so. And that's pretty much the old implementation of what we're trying to achieve with this particular middleware. Its only job is to redirect the user away from the login page if they've already been logged in, right? So we're going to be registering this middleware in our security controller. And all we do that is, this is something that we've not yet touched on, but within the security controller, I'm going to come below the constructor. I mean, you could go anywhere, but because I'm just going to put it below the constructor. You could put it wherever in the class, it does not matter, but for organization purposes, I'm going to put it below the constructor. So it's going to be a protected method, protected function, and it's call before middleware. And again, I'm going to get rid of this bootstrap. Get rid of this bootstrap that's been generated by PHP Storm. I'm going to return that middleware that we've just created. Now, this part is really important because we must. This array is a key value pair where the key is the actual name of the middleware class, and the value is also the name, but the qualified namespace of where that class is. So we call this middleware is already logged in, and we're going to say is already logged in : class, and that should have imported that at the top for us right here, right? Let's put a semicolon there so we're not getting an error. And that's pretty much all we need to do to register a particular middleware within a particular controller. Now, this middleware will only work in this controller because this is where it's registered. In other system, you register your middleware on your actual routes, but in my system right here, this is how I'm doing it. I'm registering it in the controller, and it's going to be specific to this particular controller. It won't work anywhere else, right? I mean, the class will work somewhere else if you've defined it somewhere else, but it only works in the controller class to where you defined it. So that alone should work, and we're going to go back onto the browser. We're going to demonstrate. So let's go back to the browser again, and let's kill the source, and we're already logged in. So we're going to try and type in that login again, and we're going to see if it's going to prevent us from hitting that login form again. So it's going to be login, and you can see we display a message at the bottom that says you are already logged in, right? So we're not even able to get to the login form again. So we can try again, login, enter, nothing. It's not even showing it. It's just displaying that message that we've just defined in the middleware, says you are already logged in. So that's middleware that we've just implemented. It's a very small middleware, and you can imagine that you can take this to any level that you want. You know, you could do quite a lot with it because we're executing before the route is actually called. So we've got access to all that request and response. So, and you're probably wondering, how have we got access to request and response? Remember, the controller object contains all of those other objects like our request and response and session and cache. So we got all that information that we can manipulate before we call any route, right? Because that is how I've set this up. Other frameworks done it differently, but bottom line is it's still achieving the same result, right? Again, you can skin a cat in many different ways, but the result at the end of the day should be the same, and that's effectively what you're getting back right here, right? So that's our security controller. We've implemented event dispatching for dispatching or for creating events that we're using to do redirects and flashing the user for a message. And we're also implementing middleware, and you've seen the structure, and once you do one, you know every other middleware and event that we created going forward is going to implement the same basic structure, which with the only difference being the actual code that you're implementing, right? So with all that said, there's only one last thing for us to do within the security controller, and that is to implement our logout system, which is going to be a method also within our security controller. It's going to have its own route. So we're going to be registering a new route within our route.yaml file. We're going to be creating another action event class and another subscribe class, which is going to be handling all the logout stuff, because we can actually fire events on that process as well. So we're going to be doing that in the next video.